Little introduction about me. I've been working in IT my entire career, and kind of always been working around kind of service management, asset management. And I started my career like a lot of IT professionals on a help desk, taking phone calls, logging incidents, and escalating accordingly. So started there. That was at a large engineering organization. And then about 7 years ago, I worked for Saracen as a consultant in their professional services team. I still have a lot of, we deal with customers in the real world, a lot of experience of the real world. I think ITSM and ITAM are great examples where there's loads of great process and frameworks and ITIL and those things, but they don't always work, as perfectly in the real world as they do in the book, as they do, in the videos. So I really like to keep a hand on the real world and what actually works really well for real organizations. When I'm not working on asset management projects, this is a lot that keep me very, very busy. Evenings and weekends, we love to hang out. We love going in the woods, as you can see from this photograph here. All right, quick agenda for today's session. We're looking at maintaining accurate hardware data. So first of all, we're going to discuss how it's a step-by-step process. You've got to take it step by step. You've got to walk before you run. If you try and do everything all in once, it's unlikely to lead to success. We're going to look at the hardware asset lifecycle and what that really means. We look at kind of step by step. And we're going to look at each individual state transition process and how that's so critical to maintaining accurate data. We'll look at how we manage errors in that process, because no process is perfect, unfortunately. And we're going to require a reactive approach to find the errors, detect the errors, and resolve those. And then finally, I'm going to wrap up by talking about how we can integrate AM and SM to support continued improvement. Really sort of walking us through that model of step by step, taking it one phase at a time. And as I totally said, we will have time for questions at the end. Okay, so my title here is the bigger challenge. I work on a lot of asset management projects with customers all over the globe, and everyone's always very, very focused on collating their data from various sources, other tools, spreadsheets, all over the place. Maybe they go and do a manual inventory. They're very focused on structuring it, organizing it, getting it all beautifully uniform, and importing it into an asset management tool of some sort. And they're very, very focused on that. Now, unfortunately, that's the easy part. The bigger challenge is keeping that data accurate. Once it's in a system, once it's live data, you've got to keep it up to date. You've got to keep it accurate. You've got to maintain it. Otherwise, over time, it loses its value because it becomes more and more inaccurate and you can't trust it. So today we're looking at the bigger challenge, keeping that data accurate in our ITAM tool. And as I said at the start, you're going to find success with a CI approach, continued improvement. Trying to achieve everything at once, one big project, one big phase, will likely fail. Seen it lots of times. Lots of customers have tried to do that and not found a successful way, or certainly not an efficient way to achieve their goals. Taking it step by step, and it's a great example to deploy the ITIL continued improvement model. This diagram, for those of you that are familiar with ITIL, will recognize it from any of your ITIL certifications. It's all about constantly evaluating, ask yourself these 6 questions, and then looping back around again with the 7th question to make sure we continue improving. And ITAM is a really good opportunity to use that. As I said, importing the data is easy. Maintaining it is the hard bit. So you really got to put some focus on that. And what you don't want to do is import your data until you've got a strategy in place to maintain it, because otherwise you're just going to be constantly chasing your tail, fighting fires, trying to keep it accurate, and it will get more and more inaccurate, more and more out of date, and then you effectively achieve nothing. You've got nowhere, and you've got to start again, re-go and inventory everything, or recollect the data and re-import because it's gotten so out of date and so wrong. So really you want to start by defining the strategy, defining processes, all those things we're going to talk about for the rest of the session. And then the last thing you do in an asset management project is then collect your data and import it. And then you're ready from day one to maintain it. But I say we can do that step by step. So we can iterate around that process. So we don't have to have all our strategy in place before we import anything. But before we import any data, we want to make sure we've got a full strategy for that particular set of data. What do I mean by maintaining data? Let's dive into that a little bit more. What are we actually talking about here? You know, data isn't that fairly static? Doesn't it stay the same once you know, a device is a device? A laptop serial number doesn't change. What needs maintaining about this data? Well, from a pure configuration management point of view, that may be true. The serial number doesn't change. You know, the hardware itself, typically on an end user device, doesn't change. You know, we don't typically upgrade machines these days. It's fairly static. We just replace them when they need it. So yeah, from a pure device hardware management, what actually the object is, it's fairly static. When we start widening our asset management concept to more business concepts, more operational ideas, then we realize there's quite a lot of things that can possibly change. The location of a device can change. It can change. It can change daily if it's a mobile device and in the hands of somebody that travels around a lot. The person assigned to it or who's responsible for it, the owner, that can change. Maybe, you know, it gets passed around. Maybe we would redeploy it to somebody else. That's information that changes. And with that, there could be kind of sub information changing there. You've got cost center, department. I don't know if anyone here does any internal charging for your devices, and if we need kind of cost centers to be tracked against them, any kind of internal cost model around your IT finances. But if you do anything like that, then you're going to need to make sure those cost center records are very accurate and up to date. Otherwise, all the internal accounting is going to be off, and all the budgets will be out. And let me say this as well: some kind of internal cost center management and cross charging to different departments for IT assets, that is the best way to guarantee accurate data. Because if it's being charged the wrong place, they'll tell you about it in a second. If they've sent you back a device and you keep charging them for it every year, every month, they'll let you know, because they're going to be checking their budgets. Every department's going to be doing that and making sure that's accurate. So a really good way to get feedback on inaccurate data is to do some sort of internal cross-charging, if your organization or structure can allow that. Yeah, so departments, all those kind of things that typically go with a user, but you might track as separate things around where a device lives. We touched on configuration earlier. Yeah, things can change, not so much on end user devices, but if you're doing asset management for server hardware, those sorts of devices, storage devices, you know, kind of more infrastructure things, then that configuration could well change, and you're going to want to update that in your asset management tool and keep that up to date so you know what you've got. So when you come to any kind of evaluation of the data, any kind of cost reporting, any lifecycle management reporting, then you've got the correct information. And finally, I put it in bold because it is the most important one, is status. The status of the asset. That's what will also change through the life of that asset. That's what will that's what drives this whole process, really, is the change of status. Assets go through a variety of states in their life cycle, and keeping that up to date is going to make sure you know exactly what assets are doing what. Ones that are, you know, waiting to be deployed, ones that are deployed, ones that are retired, ones that are being tested, you know, being repaired. Those sort of things, you need to understand where your devices are. so you can deploy them effectively and get the most out of them. Don't forget your assets that you're spending money on in your organization. That's only providing benefit to the business when it's in the hands of an end user. If it's sat on a shelf, if it's waiting to be repaired, if it's waiting in a stock room to be configured, then it's an overhead and it's a cost at that point, and it's not helping your organization move forward. So we want to try and make sure that our devices are utilized as much as possible to get the most out of our hardware investments. So I said status kind of drives the whole thing. It's really the most important one there, in bold. And a lot of ITAM tools, and here I do have a screenshot from Saracen asset management tool, but any tool is going to be the same. You will find status as an attribute, as a property. Sometimes it's kind of just sitting among the fields there. It's kind of not really sticking out. I've drawn the green box on there. That's not part of the system. So it's kind of just sits in there. You think it could be like anything else, but really that hardware asset status, that is really the driver behind this whole asset management process, the asset management life cycle. That's what drives it all. What do I mean by hardware asset life cycle? Hopefully you're familiar with this kind of diagram. This is a super simple example, by the way. The reality is you'll have something a bit more complex than this. If you don't have anything like this defined, then that's something you need to be thinking about. What is the life cycle that your devices go through? Different devices will do things very, a little bit differently, but you should be able to come up with a single life cycle that every single hardware device goes through that. It's going to be some kind of input stage. It's received into the organization, it's delivered, it becomes a stock asset, stock item. And on the very far end, ultimately we know it's going to be retired, it's going to be taken out of service when it's no longer fit for purpose. And then ultimately it will be disposed of when it's taken away from our organization, and make sure that's handled properly. And then in the middle, we've got our loop that we go maybe once, maybe multiple times. Some assets will go around it many times, as they are configured, deployed, and then returned, and then reconfigured, redeployed, and then once again returned. And it can go round and round again multiple times. And at some point we know it's going to get spat out into that retired state and then on to disposed. So that's a super simple example. There's lots more things that could be on here. You may want to start tracking them earlier on in the process even than this, so they're kind of ordered state. As soon as you place an order with your vendor, you may want to track them there, in which case your process needs to start one phase earlier. You may have multiple kind of sub categories, substatus here on some of mine. In stock could be kind of broken out into different kind of phases of stock. You may have a kind of waiting repair or some kind of fault status, which would be kind of on a diagram and another little branch off. Hopefully it doesn't happen a lot, but it's something you need to certainly consider. Is lost and stolen. Devices get lost, devices do get stolen, and you need to make sure you've got a process for that. So there's a lot more than just I've got in my very simple example here that you will have to come up with for your hardware asset life cycle. And then what we need to think about is every time we change state, every time we go along from one green arrow to the next, every time we move along this life cycle, that's a state transition, and we need a process to handle that. So, for example, if we're going from configured to deployed, then we're going to need to update the location. Where is it now? Where has it been deployed to? The same, we may need to put that cost center, and we talked about cost center already. We may need to track that. That might be a very important thing to make sure is allocated to that device when it's deployed. If we are going from deployed to returned, so someone leaves or hands back their device for any reason, they've got a new one, they've changed their role and need a different device, and the device is returned, then we're going to need to remove that assignment, remove that it's tagged against that person, that they're now responsible for it, back into our control. We need to remove the cost center, so they're not charging that department still for that device they haven't got anymore. Set the location to the stockroom or wherever it's going to be stored. It's very important to do this. You know, we talk about how important it is to kind of get that deployment part right, make sure we've got the correct cost center and the correct user assigned against it. Just important when it comes back in as well to reallocate it, because now it's back under your control. You're responsible for it now when it's returned. So you need to know where it is and who's responsible for it and who's paying for it and that sort of thing. So just important there as well. And then my last example, you know, we're going from retired to disposed. I touched on how critical that is. We're all aware of you know, security requirements, compliance requirements, data integrity, GDPR, all those things we need to consider at that point of disposing an asset. So we need to make sure we've got a really good process to cover that off. And it will involve updating the record with a disposal reference, maybe a certificate as well from your disposal vendor who's come and certified that the data's been wiped and the device has been destroyed, and those sort of things, depending on your you know, your security and compliance requirements. Each of those things is a process. Each green arrow to another green arrow is a process, and you need to make sure you've got that that process defined. So let's look at that a little bit more. So for each of those state transitions, for each of those processes, for each green arrow to another green arrow, you need to ask yourself these three questions. And unfortunately, you need to also answer those questions. So firstly, what needs doing? What needs doing in that state transition? And that's both physically what needs doing and what needs doing with the asset management tool, with the asset register. You may have one of those two things already defined, but you need to make sure you've got both. And it's one process with physical steps and you know, the steps to actually update the record as well. So in the deployment situation, you may well have, you know, already the process defined of they're going to put it on the desk or they're going to ship it out to somebody, but also then we've got the updating of the record to go with it. Second question, who will do it? Whose job is it going to be to update that record, to keep the tool accurate? It's got to be someone. Someone's got to do it. Don't assume somebody's doing it, because the good chance is that if that's your assumption, nobody's doing it. Someone's got to do it. It doesn't have to be one person, but every single time, of course. In large organizations, that's not possible. It has to be shared. But for each process, we need to document how we define who does it. Could be based on different types. You know, one person is responsible for laptops, they'll make the change if it's a laptop. Someone else is responsible for mobile phones, they'll make the change if it's a mobile phone. Whatever it is, you need to make sure you could define that, and that's captured. And the third question, what is the trigger? How do they know to actually do that? How does that person actually know to go and do that? How do we communicate that it's time to go and make that change? And how do they get the information to do it? How are they passed? You know, it's been deployed to this user at this location with this cost center. Or how do they get to know that this particular device has been disposed of, it's been sent off for destruction, this is the reference number from the vendor to certify that destruction? How do they get that information? So we've got to figure that out as well. What's the trigger that's going to make them go and do that, and how is the information passed to them in that process? So you've got to get all that defined, you've got to get all that documented, written down, and you've got to get that all communicated. You've got to make sure, obviously, that people who are responsible for that know about it, they know what to do, they know how that information is going to come to them, they understand the process. So lots to do there, and that is for each of those state transitions. For each of those processes, you need to go through these three questions. and document your answers and your process. Something that can help with particularly the kind of what needs doing and the trigger and that sort of thing is a lot of tools. A lot of asset management tools will have the ability to kind of perform an action, a custom action of some sort. In the Sargent tool, we call it a custom task, and you can kind of make multiple changes in one step, in one action. So there's an example here where when you click on dispose hardware asset, you get asked for 2 pieces of information, and then the tool itself will update the record with that information and all the other fields that need updating as part of that. So that can really help to, this can be your way to really communicate what needs doing. The actual doing it itself can be set up by the tool. So the asset manager would input the disposal date and the reference, and then the tool would update the record with that information. It would set the status to disposed now that it's been disposed. And if you've got a good tool, you can control all those possible state transitions as well. So maybe it's not possible to dispose something until it's already in a retired state, so you can't dispose it straight from deployed, to make sure we're going through the correct steps each time. So that's something you could control as well within your tool to try and help with that communication, try and help with that stuff. So for each of our state transitions, we've asked ourselves these 3 questions. We've documented all of our processes. We've communicated that to everybody concerned in our team, in our IT team. Unfortunately, once that's all done, I'm afraid you still can't forget about it. You can't yet go on that holiday. You can't yet retire and know that your data is going to stay accurate, because no process is perfect. This is great proactive work. We need to do this. We need to make sure we do all this good work. But mistakes happen. People make mistakes. Human error happens. Poor communication. We think we've communicated something, but really we haven't. All that happens. So unfortunately, this alone is not going to be enough. We've got all this great proactive work. We also need some reactive measures to make sure our data stays accurate. And it's going to be the combination of the 2 that ensures that accuracy. So we're going to need some exception tracking. We're going to need to be able to spot these, or have something spot them for us. So we need to define what we mean by exceptions. What are exceptions? We need to define those. These are going to be sort of business rules based on your process, or based almost on the opposite of your process. It's based on the process not being followed. So for example, an example of exception could be an asset record that's got a deployed status, but it doesn't have an assigned user, or it doesn't have a cost center. That's something that should never happen if our process is followed perfectly. Because in our example, we say that every time we deploy an asset, we set it to deployed, we should be assigning that user to it, so we know who it's been deployed to. So if we find one that's deployed, doesn't have a user, that's broken the rule. So that's our exception. And again, that's one example. There's going to be lots. There's going to be probably tens, maybe hundreds of examples, depending how detailed you want to get. Ultimately, remember I said step by step. So you don't need to do that right away. So for each of those state transitions, you want to define an exception for if a part of that process or that whole process doesn't happen properly, gets missed. So that's defining our exceptions. And then the second thing we need to figure out is how we're going to communicate those exceptions. How do we know about them? Who needs to know about them, and how do they know about them? Generally, things kind of fall into 2 areas here. Some sort of real-time notifications, or maybe a report is the other way. So again, it's a bit more of a kind of proactive versus reactive approach to the exception. So real-time, it can get very noisy. maybe early on in your project. You might find that's just too much because you have too many data errors, too many exceptions. But actually, if you can get down to a reasonable level, notifications can work really, really well because they're much harder to ignore. You can't forget about them. They're going to be coming through on email or some kind of instant message alert. Reports, obviously, noise, but you've got to, someone's got to go and check that. Someone's got to go and run that report or look at that dashboard. Have you got that configured? And look for it. And what you'd hope, you want to build that report to show you the assets, the asset records that meet that exception criteria. So I would make a report or a dashboard that shows me all of the assets that are deployed that don't have a user, but the user's blank. And if everything's done well, everything's been followed perfectly, that report should always be empty, no records. So maybe we make it someone's daily or weekly task to go and run that report, to go and look at that dashboard, whatever it is, and hopefully it's blank, hopefully it's zero. But if there's one or more on there, then we're obviously going to need to take some action. So yeah, if you're going to go down that kind of report way, then you're going to need to make sure someone's tasked with that job, daily or weekly probably. And then either way, whether it's in notifications or in reports and dashboards, you're going to need to set some KPIs around that to make sure that that's actually happening, that we're actually taking action on those notifications or taking action on those reports if they do contain some records. Okay. Once we've an exception has been discovered, been communicated to us, we want to investigate it. Yes, we are going to fix that data issue, and you can see that's our final point here. We are going to have to resolve that. We do need to go and fix that data. Again, in our example here, we're going to go and find out who that's deployed to and update the record with their name. But before we just jump in and fix it, or at least alongside it, we want to investigate what happened there. This is where we get to use that CI process, that continual improvement. If we just fix it, fix the data, then next time it's going to happen again, and next time it's going to happen again. So we need to investigate, what went wrong in the process. Why did we get this exception? How did it go wrong? In what way? In what way is the process not followed? And then you need to start again asking yourself some questions. Does the process make sense? Is it just too complicated? Do we need to simplify it? Is it just too difficult for people to understand and follow? Have all the individuals been properly trained? Have we actually communicated it to everyone? Just sending out an email saying, hey everyone, here's the new process, probably isn't going to be enough. You need to validate that communication has actually happened and that it's understood. Maybe you're going to need to do some training. Maybe you need to, when you investigate, you'll discover that somebody never got the training. They were out sick that day. They were hired since that training took place, and we forgot to include that into our onboarding process. Loads of ways where in the real world, things can go wrong. So you're going to want to investigate, why did this go wrong? And quite often we need to look at ourselves, as asset managers. We love detail. We love getting kind of really into the kind of finer points, and we do often build very complicated processes. And we do just expect people to understand them sometimes. And maybe we need to look at ourselves, look in the mirror, and think, yeah, I've made this too difficult, or I just didn't explain it enough. I didn't put enough time into my communication. I didn't give people the chance to ask questions or validate they've actually understood it. So, in my experience, quite often that the fault, not that we need to necessarily blame anybody, but in terms of fixing it, the fault can lie with us, and we need to go and do our job a little bit better. So bear that in mind before you jump on someone for not following a process. Okay, so we're going to want to deal with all that. We're going to need to retrain or recommunicate or simplify. That's very important. that means that next time round we won't be here again in a month's time. And that's us doing our continual improvement as part of our ITIL framework. And then finally, obviously this is critical too. We do need to resolve that exception, because otherwise two things are going to happen. One, the data is still wrong, which is obviously not what we want. And secondly, it's going to still be on that report when it gets run again next time, next day, next week. The notification is going to fire again next time. So we obviously need to fix that data errors to get us good data. So we would need to investigate, the missing data or the inaccurate data, and complete the record and get that fixed. Okay. All right then. So some practical tips, just to kind of start wrapping up here. Start bringing this together. As I say, start simple. Start with a simple life cycle. Start with simple set of data. A very good approach is my third bullet point here. I'm getting ahead of myself. One device type at a time is a really good approach. So start with laptops. Start with phones. Whatever your kind of critical area is that you need to get right first, identify that and start there. Get all your processes in place for that one type of device, get that data imported, test those processes out, run your exception reports, find those errors, fix them, but also fix the process and iterate a few times round. That's going to be a lot more manageable in terms of actually, what the workload there. To if you've just got one set of data, just laptops, for example, than if you've got every single asset that you own. And secondly, it means that when you come to do the rest, you've already been through the continuous improvement lifecycle a couple of times. So you've really started to find, areas that can easily go wrong. You've fixed your communication issues. You've fixed your training issues. So next time around, it's going to be a lot smoother and a lot smoother and a lot smoother. So yeah, start simple and build up and iterate. And then you can start to add in more and more complex processes as you kind of mature around. We talked about the failure, hardware failures, stuff in for repair, lost and stolen. We touched on as well, so we can start to add these in as we iterate through. And I've mentioned it a few times, but it really is important because I see people try and do it all the time. Don't add any data until you have these processes into a new system. If you're doing an asset management project, wait until you've got these. So if we're going to go device type at a time, start with laptops. Figure out your processes, document your processes, communicate your processes, then go and gather all your data and then import laptops only and manage them there. The other rest of your assets, you'll still manage in another system if you have one previously. And then iterate another device type, another device type. That's going to really help you find success. That's going to ensure that you maintain your accurate data. Data can then help you make decisions. All right, I have one final sort of trick, one final kind of technique to share with you as well. It's something that I'm really quite passionate about. Is HAM and ITSM, integrating our asset management with our ITSM. This is something that, I talk to customers as much as I can about, because I think there's just so much value here, so much to be gained, and so many ways in which they can both help serve each other's areas. So asset management can really help serve ITSM and vice versa. And this could take one or two ways. You can integrate them at a process level, so that the processes, overlap and relate and hand off to each other. And I'll give you some examples of that in a second. But also you can do it at a technology level in terms of an ITSM tool that also provides asset management functionality, or vice versa. Something that many tools do offer. Many of the large ITSM tools offer that. It's something that Stars have found brings a lot of success to customers, is having everything in one tool both service management and asset management. So the processes can be really kind of linked and can drive each other. So some examples of that. JML is one that always comes up. So that's joiners, movers and leavers. So your kind of company onboarding processes, your offboarding processes, and any kind of transfers around. Those will currently live in your ITSM process, but there's a lot of ties into asset management in there, because as people join, they need assets, and then particularly as they, in terms of this presentation, when they move and when they leave, that's a trigger for one of our state transitions. So we talked about triggers earlier. What's the trigger? A moving request or a leaving request can be a trigger for particular state transition. Yeah, if we know someone's leaving, then that can trigger us to go and find out what assets they've got, make sure we can follow up on each of those devices and get the records updated with the fact that they've been returned. Yeah, this kind of ties as well with my next idea, my assets. Again, something that we see in lots of great ITSM tools and asset management tools is my assets. That's an end user experience, an end user kind of view of asset data, where an end user can see the devices that the organization has assigned to them. And it's a kind of way of put the ownership onto those end users to report faults as well. That's another way you're going to pick up errors in the data. We talked about doing it through charging. Just doing it through a kind of my assets page can be really effective as well. Here's just a sort of screenshot example of that, where an end user can go to my assets and they see, in this example, I've got three devices assigned to me. So yeah, I can verify, yeah, that's right, I've got a laptop, a tablet and a phone, and that's been issued to me. In this example, we see we've got some actions on the end there. They can create an incident, they can kind of log a fault against those devices. So I'll come back to that example in a second, actually, because that's my next bullet point. And they can rate that device. So you get some kind of feedback on your sort of device quality. That's really good. You may want to do other things. You may want to do some sort of yearly or more frequently than that sort of audit for your end users. So every year they have to come to this page and click to confirm, yep, I've still got that device. I've got it with me, it's still present. Or maybe there's an option to click and say, no, I've no longer got this, I've already sent it back to you. And to kind of, again, that'll be a trigger for our kind of return process. So you can use this kind of concept of end user self-service driven asset management as well to really help keep your data accurate by empowering your end users to provide some inputs, because they know best. They know what they've got more than anybody else. They should know at least what's on their desk and what's in their pocket. This same thing as well, the kind of my assets, the assets per user, a user-centric view of asset management. That comes back to a lever process as well. We just talked about JML. So in terms of a lever process, you're going to want to look up every device that individual's got. So someone's leaving, we can say, yep, we see you've got a laptop, we see you've got a tablet, we see you've got a phone. We need to make sure we get all three devices back. We need to do our process on those, whatever they are, but it's going to involve data wiping and cleaning and testing that it's still actually fit for purpose. Is it an old model that we're going to retire, or is it a good enough model we can put it back in stock and reissue it to somebody else? So all that process will be there, and you can kind of drive that in a lever process by looking at what devices a particular user's got to really help, again, just make sure we don't miss stuff, and that users don't just put their laptop in the desk drawer when they leave and it's kind of lost forever. So yeah, my next example, I touched on it, asset incident request. So again, tying our asset management and our service management together. Another way we can do that is with an asset incident request. So if someone's got a fault with their device, they would log an incident through your ITSM tool. Let's take the opportunity to tie that to our asset data. So that actually you're going to select the particular device in question. So that's a way, it's a kind of a touch point between the two processes. So we kind of get a touch, yes, this device definitely still exists. It's got a fault on it. So again, that's a trigger for maybe a repair status or a repair process, depending if it's a actual hardware physical fault. If you've got good data, which hopefully you will have, then you can sort of use your data to drive this process as well. So when a user clicks on, I want to log a fault with my device, they can get asked, which device is it? And we can filter that list to just their devices. So my user here that had 3 devices, when I click on log a fault, I would get, is it the laptop, the tablet, or the phone? Nice and simple. So they can easily pick the correct device. And that, again, that's that tie-in to our process. Another example, asset provisioning, typically be a service request. You're going to have that probably already today in your ITSM process, a provisioning step, whether it be shipping a device or going to deploy it on a desk. You can put your asset management process into there as well. So as well as the task to ship the device or configure it on the desk or whatever it's going to be, deploy the phone, as well as that, let's also take care of the asset management record. We can kind of build that part into our provisioning service request as a way of making sure that gets done. So another touch point between asset management and service management. And finally, automation. Everything we talked about today, when you sit down and add it all up, I've got to go and every time something changes, I've got to go and update these 3 things, and we've got to remember to this, and we've got to trigger something or other, and I've got to then go and look at a report every week. It's a lot of work there. So you're going to want to, once you've been through your continuous improvement process a few times, once you've honed those asset management processes and make sure they work and make sure they're effective, then you could look at automating bits and ultimately lots of that process. That would, take away the human error. That would take away, time. It saves a lot of time. Takes away, the risk of inconsistency. So really, automation is going to ultimately give you the path to really, really good data by removing that human error and that time, the time it would take to do those manual steps. And then you finally can go on holiday or retire and be confident that your data will stay accurate. All right, that's everything I wanted to talk about today. So I'll take the chance to say thank you very much for attending the webinar today. Hopefully you found it really useful.